Want to listen ad-free and get to know Natalie and me a little bit better? Make sure to subscribe on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, or search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify. For $2.99 a month, subscribers get to listen to our special journal entry episodes, which is basically like a window view of one of Natalie and I's phone calls twice a month. And you get to listen to every single episode ad-free. We thank all of our listeners who are already subscribed so much. And if you've been considering it, don't wait any longer. Head over to patreon.com, Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, or search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify. On The Murder Diaries, we've interviewed a number of people in the true crime space. Victims' families, survivors, documentary filmmakers, and even an expert from SOSA, Safety from Online Sex Abuse. We can now add a legal expert to that list. Today, we have with us Neama Rahmani. Neama is a successful former federal prosecutor who founded West Coast Trial Lawyers, a renowned LA-based personal injury law firm.
Hi, everyone. Natalie Page, thanks for having me. I'm Neama Rahmani. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I'm the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. That's my firm here in Los Angeles. We have a little over 20 lawyers here. And in addition to having lots of experience handling all sorts of litigation cases, civil and criminal, I'm a TV analyst and commentator. So I really talk a lot about three types of cases. True crime, of course. Entertainment, because I'm in LA and we represent and we sue a lot of celebrities, and then political as well. So obviously the folks in DC, especially Donald Trump, they're keeping us really busy, but also Hunter Biden as well.
Absolutely. And your impressive career in the legal industry has spanned 20 plus years, from graduating at UCLA at just 19 and then Harvard Law School at 22, which made you one of the youngest graduates in the 200-year history of Harvard Law School.
That's true. I'm a super nerd. Always have been. Always loved the law. So I like talking about it, but we'll make sure it's interesting as well. So there's nothing more interesting than an unsolved murder. I love being a prosecutor, and I handled some of those cases. I did primarily drug cartel prosecutions and public corruption, but I did deal with an occasional murder. So right now, even though I'm not prosecuting cases anymore, I talk about them a lot.
I really want to talk about those things, but I sort of want to put a pin in it real quick because I want to go back a little bit to how you got into law, what started it all, what made you want to pursue it at such a young age. Because, to graduate college at 19 and law school at 22, how do you even know what you're going to do the rest of your life? And then for you to have such an expansive career with so many different eras, it's impressive. I want to hear what got Neama started in all of this.
So my grandfather was a judge, and ever since I was a young child, I was one of those fighters, right? In this world, you have people that are lovers. I was always a fighter. So I loved arguing. And, as I sort of grew older, that turned into debate. And, there was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to be in a courtroom. I ended up skipping grades and graduating early and finishing college early because, I was taking the LSAT at 18. There was no question in my mind that, I was going to go to law school. I was lucky to get into Harvard. And my first legal jobs were at these huge law firms. I'm talking 1,000 lawyer firms representing some of the biggest companies in the world. My clients were Disney and Marriott. And if they paid a lot, but I wasn't particularly happy there. And I left there because I wanted to be a prosecutor, but also because I was hired by the Catholic Church to represent them in the sex abuse cases. Our firm was. And that was terrible, not why I went to law school. So I became a prosecutor. I did primarily drug and human trafficking along the U.S.-Mexico border. I was a federal prosecutor, worked for the Department of Justice, loved it, greatest job in the world. Then I had a couple kids. My wife, who's a lawyer for foster kids, said, maybe this isn't the best job for someone who has a family. So I then went to the city of LA. I did public corruption, government ethics for a while. And, when it was clear that my wife and I really couldn't afford to live in LA or really afford the lifestyle we wanted on 2 government salaries, I decided to go back in the private sector. But instead of doing defense work, now we do civil plaintiffs work. So we represent people in personal injury, employment, civil rights cases, people that have been victimized by their employer, or someone's hurt them, or they've been killed, or they lost a loved one. Something terrible has happened to them on the civil side. So that's what we do. We don't do any defense work. I don't defend anyone, criminals, corporations, nothing. We just represent people, and we try to give them civil justice.
It's really clear that you have quite the colorful career. And again, like we said, it's spanned already 20 plus years because you began at such a young age. And one of the things that's mentioned about your career is that you helped capture and successfully prosecute a fugitive murderer and drug kingpin that were terrorizing Southern California. And that person was also featured on America's Most Wanted. So tell us a little bit more about that case.
Yeah, that was a case that took me years. So, here in Southern California, north of LA, there is a town called Bakersfield, and Tehachapi is a small town near there. But really, Kern County ended up being one of the epicenters of the methamphetamine trade. I spent a lot of time prosecuting methamphetamine just because when I was a federal prosecutor, it was really booming. The DEA did a good job of shutting down a lot of the labs that were in the deserts here in Southern California. And a lot of those labs went down south to Mexico. And methamphetamine, it's an interesting drug. Obviously, it's highly addictive, but it's also purely synthetic. So and I think the Mexican cartels really realized that this isn't cocaine that requires cocoa leaves or heroin that requires poppy seeds. This is something that we can control the entire methamphetamine trade. So, you saw these super labs really pop up in Mexico, just miles of the border, and they started just processing this methamphetamine. And it really ended up being a huge public health issue in some of these parts of California, particularly some of the poor parts of California. Well, there was an individual named Logan Quiroga who was heavily involved in the methamphetamine trade, and he killed a rival drug dealer, and he ended up fleeing to Mexico. We got lucky. I got lucky in that he fled to Mexico with his girlfriend, and we were able to arrest her at the border coming back with methamphetamine. So Logan went from the US side down to the Mexican side. So through her, even though she didn't cooperate, we were able to get information about a lot of other people connected to her, connected to Quiroga, and we would stop them at the border. And what a lot of people don't realize is at the border, you don't have a whole lot of rights. You don't have necessarily a Fourth Amendment right. You can be strip searched, for instance. Not to say we were doing that, but we would keep an eye on individuals that we thought might be smuggling drugs to the U.S. on his behalf. And we stopped a lot of them, found a lot of drugs. And after 7 or 8 arrests, they drew a map to where he was hiding in Mexico and running his operation. And we were able to go into Mexico, arrest him, and believe it or not, deport him from Mexico to the United States because he was a U.S. citizen. And once he hit the United States, he was arrested and we prosecuted him for murder, for drug trafficking, all sorts of things.
That sounds like something that would take a really long time in planning to actually get an arrest like that done.
Oh, it took years because we'd have to arrest people. We have to cooperate them. We have to verify their information. So it's not easy. One of the luxuries of being at the U.S. Attorney's Office and working for the Department of Justice and being a federal prosecutor is you can work on a lot of what we call proactive investigations instead of reacting. So, the example I give, sometimes district attorneys or city attorneys, they're reacting to crimes that have already been committed, right? Police arrest someone, they're in custody, they prepare a report, they send the file, the prosecutors are stuck with the case. Could be a good case, could be a bad case. When you're a federal prosecutor, you can work on these proactive investigations when you're really spending a lot of time trying to identify, who's really running these drug trafficking organizations. Because when you're dealing with drugs, oftentimes the people at the top, they're not going anywhere near the drug. They place a call, the product moves. So you got to really peel back these layers of the onion to get to that person. And we were able to do that both because at the time and the resources, the agents I work with, FBI, DEA, Border Patrol, DHS, they were fantastic. And because, frankly, I wasn't overwhelmed with a huge volume of reactive cases, I could focus on trying to spend time on these proactive prosecutions.
Obviously, this person is a super dangerous criminal, and he was on the run with his girlfriend, and who knows how many brothers in arms he had, that knew what he was doing. Were you ever concerned for your safety in relation to trying this case or any others like it?
I don't think so, because if I wasn't prosecuting a case or investigating it, someone else was. I don't necessarily think it was personal. And frankly, if you're prosecuting drug cases, it's much more dangerous to be a witness because, let's be honest, if those witnesses weren't there, those cooperators, I wouldn't be able to build my case. And if they disappeared or something bad happened to them, the case might go away. If someone went after me, it would just be a death penalty case and there'd be 3 other prosecutors that would step in and take my place. So, it was never really personal. What I hope when I was a prosecutor, even though I put more than 1,000 people in prison, that I always treated everyone fairly. If I thought there's any chance that someone was actually innocent, I wouldn't prosecute the case. I declined a lot of cases. So hopefully I wasn't known as a prosecutor that ever prosecuted an innocent man or woman or really treated someone unfairly. Obviously in this particular case, a lot of what I did was mostly on the investigative side, but Quiroga ended up pleading guilty. It's not a case that was really defensible on the merits. Most of my time and effort was spent actually trying to find him and arrest him rather than put him away at trial.
Is that different than the experience with any of the other cases that you had as a prosecutor?
Oh yeah, I had cases where clients obviously didn't plead guilty. I'd have to prosecute them. They'd be convicted. They would appeal. But, that's our criminal justice system. Everyone has a right to a trial by jury. Unfortunately, I didn't lose many of those trials. And the way I view it is like, I'm not going to charge someone unless I'm prepared to go all the way. Even right now, if someone hires my firm, if they hire West Coast trial lawyers, right? And we talked a little bit offline with me representing, Sheena Shea and Vanderpump Rules. If I take a case here at the firm, I take it not with the expectation that it's going to settle, even though most cases do settle. Most defendants do plead guilty. But you have to take the case expecting that you might have to try the case. So to the extent that people didn't plead, I was as a prosecutor, and I'm still willing to try every single case that comes to the firm. We're not a firm that signs cases to settle. Although a lot of cases do settle, we sign cases with the expectation that we'll try them if necessary.
You mentioned Sheena Shea. I was kind of telling you before we were recording that, that's where I actually had first heard you. And one of the things that you and Sheena talked about was when she was served on Watch What Happens Live. And it was advised to Sheena that not only was the type of restraining order that Rachel had with or against her in need of a kind of hearing in order to get rid of it, that the document that was given to her on Watch What Happens Live wasn't even the right type of document for the other type of restraining order that can be relieved with just documentation. This is all by what is presumably like advice that Rachel was receiving from her lawyer and documents that her lawyers maybe were preparing or helping her prepare. So what do you do in cases like that where literally the other side's lawyer isn't even doing the correct processes to put the action items in motion?
Yeah, so one thing about being a lawyer is whenever you're involved in a case, there's always a lawyer on the other side. And sometimes they're fighting everything you're doing. Sometimes they're doing things correctly or doing things incorrectly. So this was the issue. Now I'm going to get in the legal weeds a little bit, but I've gotten this question a lot. And in California, there's really three types of restraining orders. The first is what we call an emergency protective order, or an EPO. That's what happens when, police show up at your house. There's a violent situation. They have to separate the parties. Oftentimes husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, people living together. So what they do is they get on the phone and they call a judge that's on duty, and they issue what's called an emergency protective order. Usually just lasts a couple of days, but keeps the parties apart for just a few days until there can be a temporary restraining order. So that's not what we were dealing with in this case. There was no emergency protective order. But this is how a temporary restraining order works. And this is what Rachel had gotten and what we were dealing with. With a temporary restraining order, you go ex parte to the judge, which means that it's just you. You don't necessarily have to serve the other side. And you give a count to the judge, and then the judge decides whether to grant a restraining order for a temporary period of time. Usually it's just a few weeks until there can be a hearing on a permanent restraining order. So Rachel did go to the judge by herself, and she got this temporary restraining order, and it had lasted weeks. Now, the issue is under California law for the type of restraining order that she got, you can't just dismiss it, can't call the court and dismiss it, can't file anything to dismiss it. It remains in place until the permanent restraining order hearing. And the problem was, she didn't want to have anything to do with Rachel at that point. But the problem was they were scheduled to film the reunion show during that temporary restraining order period. So as everyone saw, obviously, Sheena and Rachel had to be separated from one another in that trailer. They could be 100 yards. I mean, the study isn't even that big. But what Rachel's lawyer was trying to do was kind of unwind all this, even though there was no procedural mechanism to do so. So Andy Cohen famously served Sheena on set with what was a request for dismissal. But that was a request for a dismissal of a civil lawsuit, something completely different, not a temporary restraining order. There's no document to dismiss a temporary restraining order. When Sheena called me, she's like, "Oh my God, I've been served." And I said, "Well, text me a picture. What is it?" And I looked at it. I'm like, "Well, this is the wrong document." It was a wrong case number. You can just rip it up. I mean, it has no legal effect, no meaning. That's why we had to show up at the permanent restraining order hearing. That's like a mini trial. We were prepared to move forward, put on their witnesses. Now, at the permanent restraining order, if the judge grants it, it can last 3 years, it can last 5 years. And if you violate it, you'll get arrested. You can't have a gun. There's all sorts of effects of having a permanent restraining order. It goes in like what we call your clets. So you can be arrested. It's a situation. So we had to show up and we had to be ready, even though Rachel had said that she intended to dismiss it or tried to dismiss it with a document that had no legal effect. If she showed up and was ready to go forward, we were going to go forward.
Thanks for that insight.
Beyond this specific case, are there any other cases that stand out to you that you can talk to us about that you think our listeners might find interesting, either true crime related or adjacent?
Since I'm not doing any criminal defense work, I'm not personally handling any true crime cases. But literally minutes before, a reporter from Fox was texting me about the Brian Koberger case, obviously the biggest true crime case right now. Idaho murder case is going to go to trial. Cover Rex Heuermann. I mean, I do long crime in court TV. So any trial that's happening, I'm one of the legal analysts that's going to be talking about it. As far as cases we're handling at the firm that might be interesting to your viewers, we are representing all the clients who are suing Lizzo for sexual harassment, race discrimination. That's a case that's being handled by our firm. We are representing the teachers of Donda Academy, the principal who are suing Kanye. That's the case that I was talking about just today. So we have a lot of cases against celebrities. We're suing Jason Derulo. We have cases against Olivia Wilde and Jason Sudeikis. So just the fact that we're in LA and sometimes I represent celebrities, sometimes we sue celebrities. So those are probably some cases that at least are going to be interesting to your entertainment viewers.
Those are definitely names people are going to recognize. So yeah, I remember hearing about a few of them myself in the news or on TikTok.
When you think about a successful business, like Only Murders in the Building star Selena Gomez's Rare Beauty, sure, you think about an in-demand product that's high quality, that has scary good marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually a business behind the business, making selling and buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%. This means way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So if you want to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling and strolling. On the web, of course, in your store, in your feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret that the businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Rare Beauty uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/murderdiaries, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/murderdiaries to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/murderdiaries. It really is wild. Like you mentioned, like you're not necessarily... The law that you primarily practice isn't necessarily like dealing with them, but because it's LA, it's kind of just all comes together. Like you said, you're suing celebrities and all of these things end up getting tied up, or you're commenting on cases that might not be directly related to you because you get involved in the world somehow just by being there.
Oh yeah, I mean you can't. It's LA, so I think a few weeks ago it was a car accident case we filed that happened to be Alan Ruck, that was the other driver. I mean, these things just happen. There's tons of celebrities that go to school with my kids and celebrities' kids. It's just part of living in LA. You sort of get used to it. So, if you file even a run-of-the-mill lawsuit, employment or personal injury, there may be a celebrity involved. And that's one of the fun things about living here.
Absolutely. And one of those celebrities that I'm also remembering now that I think was discussed in an interview of yours was Britney Spears and her horrific 13-year conservatorship. And to be honest, this is something that, and I won't speak for Natalie, but we talk about this all the time as best friends. I believe it's confusing to both of us, trying to understand this conservatorship. And is it really over? You hear all this commentary in a 3-minute TikTok, and I'm still just left feeling confused. Can you give us a little clarity on what's going on with Britney?
Yeah, so Britney Spears was under a conservatorship, and there's two types of conservatorships. There's a conservatorship over the person, and there's a conservatorship over one's finances. So Britney Spears was subject to both, which means that she can't control her money. she can't control herself. So I'm talking about everything from medical decisions to simple things like driving a car or even where she lives. So a conservatorship is the most extreme form of legal control. And it was never meant for someone like Britney Spears. It's meant for people that are in a coma, that have severe special needs or dementia where they cannot take care of themselves. What happened to Britney Spears was a miscarriage of justice. Obviously, she had some mental health issues. Those are well documented, but that's not enough to put someone under conservatorship, to take away all their rights.
Right.
And it seems that the folks that were involved in the conservatorship, whether it was Jamie or the lawyer or whomever, they really did her wrong, in my opinion. I mean, this is someone that was one of the most successful entertainers of our generation, had a Las Vegas residency, was making tons of money, was in relationships, and she can't make any decisions for herself. She's subject to control, whether it's cameras, whether it's people that are following her in terms of security and so forth. So it's not right. I'm glad that she's finally out. Frankly, she should have never been under a conservatorship in the first place. So I really do wish her the best. I've never represented her, but I'm sorry that the legal system treated her the way she did.
It's pretty unprecedented for a conservatorship, regardless of which type, to last 13 years, right?
It really is. And this is something that, whether it's the judge or the parties involved, they should have been really asking questions. Why is Britney Spears under a conservatorship? Sometimes, whether it's lawyers or judges, if there's no objection, if no one's complaining or raising the issue, they tend to rubber stamp things. But I don't think this was the right decision. The judge should have just said, hey, why is this young adult who was clearly lucid and coherent under a conservatorship? This is not what a conservatorship is meant for.
She's not the only celebrity that's been under a conservatorship. I believe Amanda Bynes was also subjected to one. So it seemed like, it happened to Britney, and then it sort of became a trend with other celebrities being put under them.
Yeah, Amanda Bynes, same thing. She was obviously in rehab. She had substance abuse issues, but that's not enough to be under a conservatorship, right? I mean, that's not the reason. Now, there's things that you could do because the conservatorship is so extreme. Let's say you have concerns about someone. You can put their assets, in some sort of trust, or you can have a, advance directive or power of attorney. There's things that you can do to kind of help someone that needs the help, but taking away all their rights. So Amanda Bynes, she wanted to get married, and she couldn't get married because she was under a conservatorship. Her parents or the conservators had to agree to it. So we live in a country where people can make their own decisions, even if they're bad decisions. Look, only 50% of marriages end in divorce. That's because you're making a bad decision or a rash decision as to who you're going to marry is not a reason to put you in a conservatorship. Drug abuse and alcohol abuse, that's a huge problem in this country. But if that was a reason to put under a conservatorship, millions and millions of people would be under a conservatorship. So if people just understand that it is so extreme and is meant for the most serious cases where people are unable to take care of themselves, eat, bathe, go to the bathroom, those types of things, they'll realize that, Britney and Amanda should not have been under a conservatorship.
What's next for someone like Britney and Amanda, celebrity or not, after an extensive conservatorship like that ends? I mean, that's something that kind of worries me. Like, what's the transition? Essentially the conservatorship, it could get them care, but it's not care that they get to always choose, right? Who's my lawyer? Who's my doctor? All of these things are chosen for them. And so it kind of makes me wonder, what is next for someone when a conservatorship like that ends?
I can't imagine what Britney Spears' life was like. When I talk about control, it's like being a child. You can't even access your social media or, choose what doctors you see or what medication you take. I mean, she was on lithium, and, lithium is typically used for people who are bipolar. I don't know if that was her diagnosis, but again, she has no decision-making authority. So now she goes from this really, really extreme form of control to really having no control whatsoever. Now, what are really her options? She can't really do much against the court. Judges generally have immunity. So the question is, if there was some financial improprieties, does she want to go after her dad? It's pretty well documented that both he and the lawyer, made millions of dollars over this 13-year conservatorship. And was that appropriate? Were there any improprieties? Is she going to do an audit, or is she just going to let this go and move on with her life?
Right. And what does that do to the mental health of, say, Britney or Amanda or anybody who was put on a conservatorship? because of mental health issues, what does that do to them there? We're re-traumatizing. Like, I think that these are sometimes things that are maybe missing a little bit in the legal system.
It really is. It's just not meant to deal with, someone who's bipolar, someone who's going through a bad divorce, someone who is having a breakdown because she's a young woman and dealing with the stress of, paparazzi or, this immense workload, or again, Amanda Bynes, someone who rose to fame, at a young age, and maybe she wasn't ready for that. But again, it's not enough for someone to be under a conservatorship.
So on top of running your business as a successful lawyer, you also host a podcast called LA Legal. You cover a lot of cases. In recent memory, there was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case and the Parkland shooter sentencing. Can you talk a little more about what you do on your podcast and your decision to start one?
So the decision was actually Liana, one of my colleagues. So she loves true crime. Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard was really the trial of the century for so many reasons. The biggest trial probably since OJ, because it was covered every day on Law and Crime and Court TV. The allegations were so salacious. You're talking about drugs, you're talking about sex and infidelity, violence, and then two very different sides of the story. You're talking about Johnny Depp, who one of the greatest actors of our generation, and a lot of people agree with the result and others don't. But what I think everyone can say is that there were two very, very different accounts of what happened. And one person was lying. And we heard them both testify, not once, but twice. And I think the whole world was watching. But there's a lot of other cases that have really gotten a lot of attention. And I think with people that really start to understand our legal system, our criminal justice system, our civil justice system, and take an interest in these cases, both while they're being investigated and when the trials happen, there's this real need for legal commentary and analysis, right? So everyone kind of, remembers Elaine Bredehoff, right? Who was Amber Heard's attorney. She was like struggling when Camille Vasquez was objecting, and she couldn't overcome those objections. So what I would do on a day-to-day basis, I would come and do some play-by-play or color commentary, and I would explain for people that have an interest in the case, well, here's what's happening. She's asking leading questions. You can't do that on direct, or she's unable to establish the foundation for the questions. Just to kind of explain things to make law more understandable to the casual viewer that doesn't watch me on court TV every day. So that's what I did. But then we'd also recap some of, the big cases in recent memory. So, for instance, Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland school shooter, is responsible for the worst school shooting in American history, but he wasn't sentenced to death. And so I really talk about the lawyering in the case and what they did. And frankly, it was an incredible result to save his life for them to be able to convince two jurors. And a lot of people disagree with that. In fact, after that case, DeSantis and the Florida state legislature, they changed the law to require less than a unanimous jury to put someone to death. Now that's still being litigated and working through the courts. But, I would come and I really talk about the lawyering, and the judge in the case. She received a lot of criticism. She actually stepped down recently after the case. So I would kind of break it down and provide the analysis for someone that maybe isn't just scrolling on their phone and saying, oh yeah, Nicholas Cruz, he's sentenced to life, he didn't get death, but to really understand why. And that's what I like to do. I like to make law interesting and accessible and understandable for everyone.
You definitely did that for me when you were on, not to bring up Sheena Shea again, but when you were on her podcast and I listened to that episode, it was just such a pleasant surprise to be able to understand something. Because I don't understand, like, what document did Andy give to Sheena on Watch What Happens Live? We don't understand any of it. And you bring up that great point too of sometimes it's just a headline you're reading too. And maybe the person even writing that headline and the adjoining article doesn't really understand it, because the legal system isn't the easiest to always understand. And that's why we have law school. So it sounds like your podcast is a really great place to be able to get an accessible understanding of these pop culture trials, trending trials, but current event type situations that are going on that involve the legal system.
Yeah, so what I'll do is, generally speaking, I'll do two different types of videos, right? So I'll give you an example. Recently, Alec Baldwin was charged again with manslaughter. And I got questions from reporters. I got questions from just clients of the firm, people that would just see me, that would recognize me in the street, like, hey, how can he be charged again? Wasn't the case dismissed last year? So what I'll try to do is two different types of videos. So for the podcast, I'll do a little bit longer form deep dive because some people have that attention span, right? They want to actually listen to me discuss the case for 15, 20, 30 minutes. But also do a 30-second TikTok or a 1-minute TikTok to explain that, well, they dismissed because there's a preliminary hearing, but now they went to a grand jury indictment. There's no double jeopardy because the jury hadn't been impaneled really fast, just because I know some people, they want to get their legal news in really sort of bite-sized, increments. And they don't want to listen to something, especially a lawyer like me, talk for half an hour. But if I can give it to them in 30 seconds, they can at least understand what's going on. And a lot of people are getting their news on social media. So whether it's Instagram Reels or TikToks or YouTube Shorts, I try to do 2 versions so people can understand what really is going on when there's breaking legal news.
That's so smart and such valuable content, because I can't tell you how many times during the Amber Heard trial, Johnny Depp trial, there were so many people covering, so many creators covering the trial. And even from a layman's perspective, it was obvious they had no idea what was happening. They were just reacting how they felt in their gut. And to have someone that actually knows everything that goes on behind the scenes and knows all the legal terms and all the legalese really is such a valuable type of content, educational and entertaining too.
And it's super important, So for instance, there's a lot of strategic decisions made in the case, And one of the big ones was, of course, Kate Moss coming to testify because she'd previously been excluded, but Amber Heard's lawyers had made a mistake. They brought up the staircase incident and opened the door to something that was otherwise deemed irrelevant. Now you're making it relevant. So a lot of the legal strategy needed to be explained. There needs to be a discussion of, Johnny Depp's a public figure. He has to show malice. He has to show something more, talk about punitive damages. Amber Heard did actually win part of their case. Well, why can't she file bankruptcy? So, what I would do is just in sort of short little videos, I'll sort of explain, what this all means. And then if someone wants to really, really get my full analysis of the case, that's what the podcast is for.
So cool. Because again, like you mentioned, a lot of people get their news from social media. And sometimes we're going to be learning about it from other laymen that are expressing this opinion, that opinion, why not this and why not that? Or she should be doing this, or this is an injustice. But when really, if you break it down legally, you might be able to understand why something did or didn't happen. So I think that that's really, really great. And so I appreciate that. And I will definitely be tuning in. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you to tune in as well?
Absolutely. You can find me at Neama Rahmani. That's Neama Rahmani. My firm is West Coast Trial Lawyers. You can find me there. And our podcast is LA Legal. And we're on all social media. So from YouTube to Instagram, even Facebook. Some people still on Facebook. And of course, TikTok. Check us out. And if there's anything you want me to cover, just message us. There's a big case that I'm missing. We have a studio here. We have my team here that I work with are absolutely amazing. We have video, we have editors. So I will get a video up same day. If there's any breaking news or something that I missed, just let me know. I'll make sure to cover it.
Oh, that's great.
That's fantastic. I am probably going to be messaging you guys for a few cases that I see coming up. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your story with our listeners. I know they're going to enjoy it so much.
I appreciate it. Natalie Page, thank you so much for having me. Hope to be on again soon.
Make sure to follow us on all of our socials at The Murder Diaries Pod and subscribe today to listen ad-free and check out our journal entry episodes. Until then,
stay safe.
Bye.